What is going on, fight fans, Degens, fight nights? We are back here for the last fight breakdown episode of 2022. Breaks my heart to say that. We have about 4-week layoff after this one. But, for what it's worth, started from nothing here with Fight Night earlier this year. So to see it all come to a close, see where we've come here. Got to be grateful for everything, everyone that tunes in every single week. With that being said, boys, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing very well, Matt. Doing very well. I know we actually been talking about potentially having maybe a special episode towards the end of the year, which we can elaborate into another time. But man, what a card this past weekend. In honor of Biggie Boy, I had to get myself a Biggie container of kombucha for this wonderful episode. But man, what a great card, and it's been such a pleasure breaking these fights down with you guys this year, and certainly the future is very bright.
Yeah, awesome fights. I mean, they were crazy that there were so many finishes last week, and it seemed like the only two that went to decision. The judges kind of messed it up a little bit, so that's interesting to see. But we ended up in the positive for the card. I know all three of us cashed in, so just looking to keep the momentum rolling into the new year and let the good times roll, guys. We got to keep it up.
Yeah, and to touch on last week's pay-per-view 282. Obviously, you guys mentioned it, King's Purse, another successful week for us there. I think we went about 3-1, if I'm not mistaken, on the picks given out. And it felt good back-to-back weeks getting green numbers in the King's Purse. Personally, as you mentioned, we were all cashing in. Fight Night Discord channel was popping in the Knights of Degen Discord all night long. I know, Dan, you popped in once or twice. I know you were busy. Kev, you and I were in there chopping it up. You mentioned it the other day. It's probably the most nights we've ever seen in that channel during a fight night. So it was a lot of fun there. And tons of finishes, right? With the cold moon. I know you kind of thought that it was going to go the other way with the cold moon. Lots of decisions, not many finishes, but it seemed like everyone was just going out cold on that night. It was just a crazy night of fights. And as you guys mentioned, it's funny that it was finish up until the last two fights. And the judges got, you can argue they got both of them wrong, depending on which way you viewed the fights. And I guess that's why you don't go to the judges. Everyone with the finish got a $50,000 bonus. Santa Claus came knocking for Raul Rosas. We saw what he did. Dan, we got a nice clip you last time, rolled it on the YouTube shorts last week about your high praise on Raul Rosas and how his age doesn't necessarily matter. And, it all came to fruition. You look like a grappling wizard there when he took that submission in the first round. So lots to be said about him. Lots of people just did well. What did you see out of Raul Rosas that kind of proved you right and other things that maybe surprised you in that performance?
The kid just has composure. He, again, you saw at the weigh-ins how Perrin was just trying to kind of get in his head, and the kid was not phased. Came with a great game plan. Went and shot in for the single, was able to catch the back and eventually lock in the body triangle, and just from there, I mean, his finish, it wasn't even sunk in all the way. It was more of a crank than anything, and Perrin still tapped. So just goes to show, just kind of what I was saying, that 18 years old. I mean, that it doesn't matter when you've been fighting for, 5, 6, 7 years, which Rosa's pretty much been doing all his life, right? It's all he knows. So I think a lot of people were just, making that sort of man versus kid argument, and I don't buy into it. I went pretty heavy on Rosa myself. I had him in some parlays, had him straight up. We had him on the King's Purse, and first round sub. I mean, what more can you want? He made it look easy.
Yeah, and not to mention that Raul Rosas was a 5-unit play, which, if I'm not mistaken, is our second largest KP play to date. So it was certainly assuring to get a max play dub there. And, it's one of those things, these final two fights, obviously you can say the controversy is there, and it certainly was. But, let's not forget how incredible of a card it was from top to bottom. I mean, knockout submissions after another. It was so entertaining. I mean, I know I speak for you guys as well, man. I mean, it was just an incredible vibe all around. And most importantly, in Knights of Degen, the Fight Night Discord was going off. Just really wonderful to see where it has been and where we've kind of led this to.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out our boy DDP, Dracus Duplessis. We had a big play on him. If anyone tuned in last week, we had our guest Dan on there, and all four of us landed on the same page there pretty convincingly that DDP was the guy. And, all the reasons that we mentioned pretty much came to fruition. He was the bigger guy in there, the stronger guy, got the best of the grappling positions, and eventually he got that late round tap before the choke was really even sank in. It was a pretty quick tap, but all credit to Darren Till. He toughed out that first round. The ref was very close to stopping the fight multiple times. He claims he injured his knee somewhere in the second round, and to push through that all the way until the third, very impressive, especially a guy like DDP. He just is, nonstop action the entire time in there.
Hey, just a quick shout out to my boy Dan Levy for siding with me on Ilia Topuria, making it look easy.
Easy. And I was going to say, it's only right that I bring up the light of Topuria because, my goodness gracious, I mean, it was very impressive. And it really brought me to light that, man, this man is a legitimate title challenger in the future. And you love to see it, man. You love to see these types of different narratives or say nationalities, come into the UFC and make an impact. And clearly Topuria has an incredibly bright future.
Yeah. And Dan kind of mentioned the man versus boy narrative in the Rosas fight. And if anything, it was that Topuria Bryce Mitchell fight. Topuria just absolutely dominated him wherever that fight went.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
But insane night of fights. Obviously, like you guys mentioned, it stinks that it's bookended by those decisions on the end. But nonetheless, crazy night leading into this week. Now, UFC Vegas 66, as mentioned before, it is the last card of the year for the UFC. The next one doesn't take place till mid-January, and this one's headlined by Sean Strickland versus Jared Cannonier. If you guys remember, Cannonier's last fight was against Israel Adesanya this summer. Earlier on that card was the Sean Strickland versus Alex Pereira fight. We all know how that one went, but they find themselves closing out the year here. Hopefully, it's not going to be another jabberfest snooze, especially after we saw those last two decisions on Saturday. But without further ado, let's get right into the first fight on this main card. It is Cody Brundage taking on Michal Oleksiejczuk. You know me, I love my Polish fighters. I was on here last week singing the praises of Jan Blachowicz. It looked good for the most part early on, right? With those leg kicks. Mentioned that Magomed didn't really have an answer for those, but we have another Polish fighter here, Michal Oleksiejczuk, former light heavyweight, moved down to middleweight for his last fight, took on Sam Alvey, brutalized him about 1:45 into that fight. Never really close. He's taking on Cody Brundage here, who had a fight fall through with Rodolfo Vieira that was supposed to take place November 19th. That fight actually got canceled the 15th, so it was week of. Vieira pulled out, and Brundage found himself without an opponent. Oleksiejczuk now had his opponent fall out in Duraev, if I'm not mistaken, and Brundage took this fight on short notice. And, we spoke about this earlier in our little chat here about how Brundage going into that Vieira fight, he mentioned he was on a 12-week training camp going into that. And as I mentioned, that was November 19th. So he peaked his body there. 12 weeks is a gruelingly long training camp. Typically, you see about 6 weeks in the UFC. Fighters always say that that's the perfect amount of time for a training camp. He did 12, and that was 4 weeks ago. So now he had to re-prepare his body, try to revamp it, and peak once again 4 weeks later. I find that hard, for anyone to physically do, no matter what level of athlete you are, to have essentially a 16-week training camp coming into this with 2 peaks on a 4-week back end is, it's not an easy task. And going against someone like Michal Oleksiejczuk here, who's all gas, no brakes, it's going to be taxing on Cody Brundage, I believe, especially considering his only path to victory is through grappling, right? So he's going to need all of his strength. He's going to need all of his cardio to get Michal Oleksiejczuk. As I just mentioned, a former light heavyweight. He's very big for the weight class. He's got a decently sized frame opposed to when he was at light heavy. So, with that all being said, I kind of find it difficult to see how many times Brundage is able to get this one to the mat. And it's kind of a situation where he needs to get the finish the first time this fight hits the mat, if it ever does, right? Or else he's going to burn himself out. And it's just going to be a long night for him. Probably a Michal Oleksiejczuk finish, if I had to guess, by knockout. He's not a submission threat by any means. And Brundage, we've seen, can get hit before. The Dolce Lungiambula fight comes to mind just a few fights ago where the ref multiple times was close to stopping that one. He somehow survived and late in the first round got a submission of his own. Really flipped the script there. But I'm interested to see where you guys land on this one. I'm siding with my Polak brother here in Oleksiejczuk. I'll probably take an inside the distance prop as well. I know currently his money line is around minus 275-ish, which honestly, I'm okay playing that straight up, but I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the matchup you have here is a classic power puncher versus a predominant wrestler, right? I mean, a guy in Michal, out of his 5 wins in the UFC, 4 by knockout. Mind you, they're not over the greatest of competition, but I don't like to say that argument because at the end of the day, he's getting the job done. Mind you, I believe all of those knockouts that he has in the UFC, his opponents are no longer in the UFC. But this is a great spot for him to get a name in Brundage, who I don't think is necessarily a spring chicken per se. Although it did surprise me when I was looking into Brundage. I didn't realize he only had 10 mixed martial arts fights. So One of those things that he's not the most experienced guy. He is a Dana White Contender Series veteran there. But, training out of Factory X, I have a good feeling that, the cardio is certainly in check. And, there is a line that does intrigue me. It's the over 1.5 at -115. It's one of those things that in the first round, if we see Brundage find success with that early takedown and just find that control early on, I mean, we could certainly see, either a late finish on the Michal side or this to go to a decision. So that line just kind of had gotten questions me, because at the end of the day, I don't look at Brundage as, mind you, he is coming off 2 back-to-back finishes, but I don't look at this man as one that's a bona fide finisher by any means. So for that reason, I like this to go over 1.5. Should be a fun fight. I think the line is correct, just given the finishing factor on the Michal side. Should be an action-packed fight to open up this main card.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add outside that. It's pretty black and white to me. And Brundage is not going to be the imposing striker here. His path is, like you guys said, clear with the grappling. We saw in his last fight, I mean, he is content to strike if need be, and he had some success as well. So it's the only thing that I don't like here is certainly the sort of the change in style of his opponent. He went from potentially fighting Adolfo Vieira to obviously Oleksiejczuk is much more boxing dominant guy, lots of pressure, not what you get with Adolfo Vieira. So it'll be interesting. I think the over 1.5 is an interesting bet. It's I can absolutely see Oleksiejczuk sort of sprawl and brawl for 3 rounds, but we have seen Oleksiejczuk get taken down in the past. Jimmy Krug kind of ragdolled him for the majority of that fight until he eventually got the finish. So Brundage is a high-level wrestler. It wouldn't surprise me to see him have some success there. And if he can, control Oleksiejczuk for, a round and a half, I mean, who knows? This can go either way, but certainly on the feet, he's at a disadvantage here. So he needs to lean on his grappling.
Yeah, and we've seen Brundage, once he finds success with grappling, he'll continue going to that well. We saw it on the regional scene a little bit there. And I think that it's a good spot for Michal right here. As I mentioned before, him being a light heavyweight, I think that his frame is going to be a little bit too big for Brundage to handle. And you mentioned it, Dan. Rodolfo Vieira is such a different opponent than Michal Oleksiejczuk. I mean, for one, striker and grappler, but the other thing is Michal is a southpaw, so he's preparing for an orthodox fighter for 12 weeks. And now on short notice, he's got to turn around and fight a lengthier southpaw. I just think there's going to be a lot of trouble that he could present to Brundage in this spot.
Yeah, and I think the numbers are a little bit skewed. Dan, you mentioned a good fight there. It was I believe when it was Michal fought Jimmy Crute. Yeah, man. I mean, he got absolutely ragged out. He got taken down 8 times there. So like by the numbers, right? I mean, Michal has this 50% takedown defense, but it's really hard to say that's super accurate given that skewed fight there. But I do look at a guy, Michal. I mean, I don't think that look, he hits like a truck, but I don't look at him as a man that is necessarily super athletic in a sense, So again, I think that we could potentially see that world where Cody finds that early takedown. I envision either a Cody decision or a Michal knockout. Mind you, Cody does have some submission arsenal in his background, but Michal is tough. And Matt, you can attest to this, that Polish blood, heart, and spirit, man, is something to behold.
I wish Jan showed a little bit more of it on Saturday night, but it was pretty evident he was only training for a 3-rounder there, come rounds 4 and 5. But I have to add, I do think the criticism of Oleksiejczuk's grappling is very fair, and I think it's definitely going to be exploited at some point. I just don't necessarily think this is the spot where it happens.
Fair.
Now, if you guys have nothing else to add to that fight, let's move on to the lightweight division here, where we have Drew Dober taking on Bobby Green. Dober currently around -155. Comeback on Bobby Green +130. Kev, you're shaking your head like Santa Claus just brought you a nice big gift. Let's start off with you here with this breakdown.
Yeah, the irony, right? Good old Santa Claus on Christmas as Hanukkah is on the horizon. But man, Bobby King Green, like, what can you say about this man, right? I mean, it's funny, man. Obviously he's a Strikeforce veteran, and I didn't even realize that Drew Dober actually has an amateur fight in Strikeforce, like 13 or 14 years ago. It's just interesting that, finally that these paths are crossing. And, I think we can all attest to the fact that Drew Dober has truly became a fan favorite. I mean, that chin is some of the best in the entire UFC. I mean, it's evident the shots that he's been taking, the previous fights that he's had is truly miraculous that he's not only able to stay up front, but if he gets knocked down, he's able to continue to push forward. This is a really, really tough spot to find a lean. Just because the way I see this fight, man, if these guys fight 10 times, I expect both these guys to win five each. both these guys are incredibly talented. Obviously, like official journeymen of the UFC, you know, mind you, I don't expect either of these guys to make a run at the belt anytime in their career. But you know, I actually sent you guys a video a few days ago of Bobby Green fighting James Krause, and that was such an interesting fight because you know, Bobby Green, you know, he hits a leg kick, you know, right on the belt line. You hear the cup hit. It certainly wasn't on the nut. But certainly that cup shot ended the fight. But mind you, the ref thought it was just a clear knockout, a clear kick to the gut, and knocked him out. So it was I just find it very ironic, you know, with the whole James Krause situation. And then we have Bobby Green here, just kind of a funny one there. But in regards to the lean of this fight, man, it's tough, man. I expect the majority of this fight to remain on the feet. I think that if there is a shot or initiative to take it down, it is Dober. I think that he's a pretty wise fighter, and he knows what Bobby brings to the table with that boxing background. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see Dober land a takedown or two, but to keep him down there is another task and a half. So should be a fun one. I expect this to go all three, and I certainly expect this to be an absolute fireworks of a fight.
Yeah, great fight. I mean, super competitive. Two guys have been around a long time. You know, Bobby Green, I'm pretty sure he got dinged for taking a tainted supplement, and this is his first fight back after that. So, you know, he's been out a little bit. I'm sure he's been itching to get in there. And Dober, you know, he's been coming off a big win against a tough young prospect and Rafael Alves that I think a lot of people had him losing there. Alves was looked strong early, and Dober, again, that iron chin. This guy can just take a punch and keep coming. I guess the knock on Dober, it's I guess a similar of a knock on Bobby Green is that, unfortunately, like, they both don't necessarily do the greatest when the fight goes the distance. They've been on the other side of some greasy decisions, and Dober, you know, typically when he wins, it is by finish. So, do I think that he can take Bobby Green out of there? I mean, he certainly has the power to. I just think it's going to be, you know, these guys have been around a long time. I do expect like a 3-round war. It's essentially Dober's power against Green's volume and head movement. And it could really go either way. It really is a pick 'em in my eyes. And so for that reason, if I were to take a side, it would probably be whoever the dog is. I think now it's Green. But I like the fight to go the distance. I see it at like minus 138 on Bet365. I like that line. I think this goes the distance, 7, maybe even 8 out of 10 times, honestly. Just these guys, even though they both have finishes, and Dober's probably the I would say has higher upside in finishing this fight. Green has great boxing, good defense, doesn't really get hit too much. And again, he's seen it all. So I don't think Dober's going to throw anything at him that he hasn't seen. Both guys, again, this can really go either way, but fight to go the distance is for me the best spot here.
Yeah, I agree. This one I feel like definitely goes the distance. Reason why I think that is I lean Bobby Green in this spot. I also like the split decision because the reasons you mentioned, right? If it's going to be power versus output, that's like the great debate when it comes to judging which one's more impactful. So usually in a fight like this, where I believe they're both southpaw, and I know Bobby will switch from orthodox and southpaw, so it's going to be a tricky, awkward fight to score. Reason why I lean Bobby in the spot, I kind of alluded this to you guys earlier in the week, that his fight style, it's very lateral, a lot of lateral movement. He keeps his hands low. He's just looking to pretty much counter you and get out of the way. And that's why he forces opponents' striking numbers to be way lower than average. They're typically like 36% accuracy when they're fighting against him. And someone like Drew Dober, he does most of his damage when he's moving forward in a straight line or when his feet are planted. And the reason being is because he's such an explosive athlete, right? He generates all his power from his base and his legs, and he needs it all underneath him in order to be successful. And that's kind of what Bobby Green does best here defensively. He gets you moving, he gets you off your center line, and he forces you to fight him at his angles. He's creative too when it comes to finding his own angles. So I think it's going to be one of those instances where Drew is going to be swinging heavy, and I feel like he's going to eat a lot of counter shots. And I feel like once Bobby presses it forward, as you mentioned, the volume is just going to be there for him. He's just such a veteran. He's so savvy in there that I just don't really see where Drew has him covered. I know you mentioned if someone's going to initiate the grappling, I agree. I think it's probably Drew Dober, but what did Bobby Green get praised for heading into the Islam fight? The only people that gave him a semblance of a chance in that matchup is because they boasted his wrestling background, right? That he has good wrestling. He's good defensively. He's sound. So, if people thought there was even a chance that would hold up against Islam, then you have to think that, it probably holds up against Drew Dober if it's even a smidgen as good as they made it out to be. So, if he's going to be fighting this one on the feet and going to be the more defensively sound fighter with the higher output, this fight's favored to go the distance. For a lot of reasons, I like Bobby Green here.
Yeah, and we talked about the durability on the Drew Dober side, but let's not forget about the durability on the Bobby Green side, right? I mean, in 19 fights in the UFC, he's only been knocked out once, and by the champion Islam Makhachev, so you can't knock that. So this is one of those spots, man. You have two incredibly durable guys. I just peeped the split decision. It's right now at 5-1. So it's basically implying that it happens, say, 16% of the time. Now, Matt, I know you just popped a stat in the chat the other day about split decisions going 24-25% of the time in
24% in 2022.
Yeah. So, and then you're talking about a fight that should go to decision, about 80% of the time. So I do believe that you find a lot of value in hammering that split at plus 500. I was actually expecting to peep it to see more like a +4, +450 line, but at +5, it's certainly worth the sprinkle there.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I really like that play. You guys have anything else add on this one or no?
No.
Not necessarily, man. It's just going to be, man, this is part of me says that this is the people's main event. It's like both these guys have provided so much entertainment for so many years. I mean, you're talking well over a decade for both these guys. And the fact that they're both meeting now, it's truly special. The last card of the year should be action-packed. Cannot wait for this fight.
For sure. But let's move on to the featherweight division now. You got Alex Caceres taking on Julian Erosa. Erosa coming off -175, Caceres +150. This is a tough fight for me to break down personally. I don't know if either of you guys have a strong way to feel about this one. If you do, feel free to take the reins here. If not, I guess I'll tap in.
Floor is yours, my man.
But it's an awkward fight, I think. I think Julian Erosa, if there's one thing he's proven, is that he's a very tough fighter. He's going to keep moving forward, and he's just going to outgrit you for the most part in there. Interesting that both fighters kind of found themselves on a run. I know Erosa is currently on like a 3 or 4 fight win streak. He's won 5 of his last 6 in the UFC since he re-entered the UFC. I know he had a first stint that wasn't so successful, left the organization, came back. He's 5-6 since then. And then you look at Caceres on the other end. He's a ranked opponent now in the featherweight division, and that's all because of a winning streak he went on in his own right, where he beat someone like Seung-Woo Choi, who knocked out Julian Erosa a few fights ago. That's his only loss in this new stint in the UFC. So it's an interesting fight. Like I mentioned, it's an awkward fight. I think it's going to be tough to judge. I don't see much finishing upside for each one. I know that they both have, especially Erosa, has tons of finishes throughout his career. His last 2 wins both came by decision. They're just both funky. I can't stress it enough. Like neither one is too technical or orthodox of a fighter. Caceres, I think where he has the advantage here is that he's very opportunistic. He makes the most of chances that are given to him. He's very long. He's good at taking the back. And, he's cleaned up some of his defensive deficiencies too when it comes to grappling. I know he's got submitted 7 times throughout his career, last time being years ago against Kron Gracie. No shame in getting your back taken by Kron Gracie and choked out. I think you can attest to that, right, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been, to be honest, I've been fading Julian Erosa throughout this entire run that he's been on. So he's actually been costing me a little bit of money. He's been the cash cow at this point. It's crazy. This guy just keeps finding a way to win. I just think with this fight, it's interesting to call. I mean, because I just think like some of the tools that Erosa uses, particularly his reach and height, aren't going to be as prevalent in this fight just because of Caceres' elusive style. And I actually give the jiu-jitsu nod to Caceres here. I think I love the fight to go the distance here. I think Caceres can potentially outpoint Erosa, frustrate him, and I think he can actually find his back at some point in the fight. And if he doesn't, I do think that if this goes to the judges' scorecards, I mean, it can really go either way. I just feel like looking at Erosa, I don't know how you can make him a -180 at this point. Caceres is, again, another one of these guys that's been around for a long time, fought some tough guys. His last loss, again, Sadiq Youssef is a top 10 fighter in the division. And, he held his own. I mean, he's more than capable to put up a fight here. And I just think Julian Erosa is shown some promise. He's been on a nice run. I just think this line is a little bit wide. And for that, I would side with Caceres here. And I wouldn't be surprised again if we found Erosa's back. And Caceres has good back control. If he gets that back on you, I mean, he'll choke you out. That's for sure. So, give me Caceres here. I like the dog odds. I like a lot of dogs on this card, which is interesting. I mean, a lot of favorite cash on the last one. So there's that narrative to look at. But a lot of fights on this card are, you got underdogs under plus 200, and that begs me to believe that I think we'll see a lot of upsets here in this week.
Yeah, I mean, you guys say a lot of really good points. Both these guys, like you said, Matt, man, like they're so tricky fighters, man. Just for the sole fact that they both have so many different paths to victory, and that's what makes this fight really difficult. Is you have two guys that can finish this fight, on the feet, clearly, and on the ground. I mean, look at this, the statistics there. Erosa, 11 knockouts, 12 subs, and the Caceres, 3 KOs, 7 subs. So, man, it's just one of those things. I look at a guy in Caceres, it's truly miraculous that this is his 27th UFC fight. I mean, the man has been around the block. So, I'm with you, Dan. I really think that there is value on the Caceres side. I don't think that we're looking at a guy in Erosa. Mind you, he is in a very nice little skid here, and a good skid here in the UFC, winning, 5 of his last 6. But it's just one of those where I look at a guy in Erosa, I don't really think that he has the best fight IQ. And a guy in Caceres who is just such a tricky guy to prepare for. I could see that scenario where like Erosa is winning the majority of this fight and just makes a boneheaded mistake. Like you said, Caceres takes his back and chokes him out. So should be an absolute fun fight here. Just super, super crafty guys. Very unordinary. And so I'm going to lean the Caceres just because I do feel like this is more of a coin flip. I do believe that Erosa, by the numbers, should land more volume on the feet. But again, man, Caceres is just a tricky guy to prepare for, just the different ways he can take this to the mat and find a submission. So should be a fun one here between two guys that, quite seasoned in the UFC. And wouldn't be surprised by a finish on either side.
Yeah, and I'm always weary to take a fighter that I think Erosa in his last fight was north of plus 200, right? And he gets the big win there, big upset, and now we find a minus 180 here in a fight where I'm sure a lot of people will probably be taking him thinking that he's an easy minus 180, but I think there's much better spots on this card to find someone in that price range, especially like we all agree it's going to be a tricky fight. They're both going to have their moments. It's just it feels like betting this fight is just like an educated guess. You're going to throw a dart at the wall, see if it sticks. And, that's not the way to make money long term. So probably best to avoid this fight as a total. I know we're all degenerates. So come fight night, if we're rolling a little bit in the green, probably take a stab at someone here method, but otherwise worth staying away. None of us have true conviction on it, but let's move into this next fight. I know there's differing opinions here between us. Amir Albazi minus 440 taking on Alessandro Costa plus 340. Costa taking this fight on short notice. Some of you guys might remember Costa from his appearance on the Dana White Contender Series earlier this year. That was actually the first episode of the year when Dana had his Be Joe Pyfer moment, and Costa was one of the people that was not Joe Pyfer that night. So he did not get the contract, found himself on the regional scene, got one win in 12 seconds via knockout, finds himself here, short notice opportunity against someone in Amir Albazi, who has steamrolled his competition for the most part since he entered the UFC. I know Kev is very high on Amir Albazi, so I'm going to kick this one off to him, and then we'll battle from there.
Well, hey, man, it's all out of love here, and golly, I so enjoy doing this with you guys. But hey, Alessandro Costa, man, I mean, he's a guy that clearly has heavy hands, clearly is dangerous. I mean, the way he has those flying knees and just that tweaky style, right, where he just can really end the fight in an instant. I mean, one thing that I loved about the Costa side, just watching his film on the regional scene, is, man, he knows how to smell blood. Like when he knows that his guy is hurt, he is after it. So props to him. Obviously taking this fight on short notice. I believe Albazi was supposed to fight Raw Dog Royval, and I want to say Royval dropped out about 2-ish weeks ago. So certainly not the most time to prepare for this spot, but it's one of those things. And you made a good point earlier, Matt, where you have a guy who won on the Dana White Contender Series, went to the regional scene, knocked his guy out in 15 seconds. Sometimes that could always be a blessing in disguise, right? Where you have a guy who clearly potentially could have earned a contract, but, didn't get the nod. And, it's like one of those things that just adds a chip on a shoulder. And I think that we could potentially see that in this Costa side. Now, I want to start off by saying that, the line right now, I think it's like minus 435. I don't agree with that. I think it's more of like the minus 250, minus 300 range. And I think for good reason. Like you said, Matt, Albazi has steamrolled his competition in the UFC. mind you, look, in 2015, he won the blue belt world championship, this, that, and the other. Hats off to him. But I tend to think that, 7 years later, he's evolved his game a little bit. And one thing that I do love about Amir is he also stalks his opponent. This is going to be a head-on collision. And, quite frankly, I genuinely love what I see in Albazi on the ground. There is one moment where he basically had his guy against the cage and had the IQ to turn him towards the middle to keep him on the mat. And I just think that Amir has really good awareness on the ground. I think that he's able to advance position from guard to side pretty seamlessly. And it's one of those things, man. I think he has incredible cardio as well. For what it's worth, man. If this fight does so happen to go into the third round, wouldn't surprise me here. But man, one thing that I do like about Albazi as well is those low leg kicks. I think that if he can land those early on Costa and avoid those big shots, I think we could see a world with those hands do drop on the Costa side. And mind you, Albazi, man, I believe he's training predominantly at Extreme Couture. Taking that leap of faith. I know he's also spending a lot of time at the UFC PI Institute there. So clearly this man is taking it incredibly seriously. I'm super bullish on Albazi. I think that he is a dark horse of this division. I think that he's an incredibly well-rounded prospect. And taking on a guy on short notice, it's just one of those times where I just feel it, man. I just think that Albazi is going to get the job done here. I think if Costa doesn't find that knockout early, I think that he's going to be in trouble to either a decision loss or potentially finding a submission loss. So should be a really, really fun fight. I'm really looking forward to, hopefully Albazi gaining a few more believers here. I do believe that he's a legitimate prospect and can't wait to see what he does in this matchup.
Yeah, Albazi's good. I think good jiu-jitsu. He has good stand-up. I just think when I'm kind of looking at this fight, I just and I think I mentioned this to you guys earlier. 2-3 fights ago, he's a minus 132 favorite against Malcolm Gordon. Now he's a minus 435 against Alessandro Costa, who I think is one of the top prospects in globally for flyweights that are not in the UFC. I had him actually by decision against in the Contender Series that first week because I knew the guy that he was fighting was also very, very good. So Costa is I think been around a long time. He's pretty well known, for those sort of hardcore fans that kind of know, again, sort of the up and coming guys in the space. But certainly not an easy task. But I have no doubt that he's kind of ready for this. The guy, fights 3 months ago in the Contender Series, doesn't go his way, takes another fight, finishes it in spectacular fashion, takes no damage. So, he's fight ready. And I think, it's a perfect opportunity for him here. I see this having, parlay buster upside, honestly. I don't see how you put Albazi this big a favorite against a guy like Costa, who's not, he's been around and he's, again, he's fought some tough guys. So, I think versus some folks that come off the Contender Series, I think Costa's going to be one of the more interesting guys that we see. Having said that, he can come out and get steamrolled by Albazi, and then I'll look really stupid saying this, but you got to take a stand somewhere. I think looking at this card, a lot of close fights. Maybe people are just assuming that Albazi is going to steamroll Costa, a name that nobody really knows at this point. That would be very surprising, and I think it's entirely within the realm of possibility. I do. I mentioned this to you guys earlier. I rewatched some of Albazi's fights, and in the fight against my boy Zalgis, he got taken down in the first round. Zalgis was posing some problems. It was a close first couple rounds, and then in the third, Albazi, had a good game plan. Came in, it was able to take him down, win that round, and eventually won on the judges' scorecards. Aside from that, he hasn't really faced much adversity. But, again, his other two fights, Malcolm Gordon, Francisco Figueiredo, two guys that aren't really physically imposing, I would say. Whereas I think Costa, very well-rounded, has good power that I think he'll be able to match Albazi with. It'll be interesting to see if Albazi decides to take this to the ground and how Costa reacts. It'll be, because I do think, again, these guys are relatively the same size. And we know that Costa has the power. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the approach here for Albazi. He should win. He should win. But again, at these odds, it has to be dog or pass for him.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you here, Dan, a little bit. I think when you're looking at this matchup, we're taking into consideration that Costa's, he's demolishing people on the regional scene. We saw him on the Contender Series, right? Fought a pretty boring decision, but he did win the fight. It's to be noted, though, like you mentioned, that guy Luna that he went up against, he was 12-0 going into that fight. He's a 5'7" flyweight with a 72-inch reach, so very big for the division. Tricky. He's also a southpaw, so it's a very tough puzzle for a young, what was he, 11-1 going into that fight, 11-2 going into that fight. It's a tough puzzle for someone like him to figure out. I think, he did a decent job with it. Obviously not enough to get the contract, but Kev, you kind of said this before. I think this is kind of like a blessing in disguise, right? He's dominated all his opponents, has the biggest moment of his career, doesn't make the most of it, comes out in his next fight, gets a 12-second knockout, takes a fight like this on short notice where really Albazi's a one-dimensional fighter. I think it's pretty safe to say that he wants to get this fight to the ground on the feet. I think he's capable, right? I don't think that's necessarily where he wants to spend most of his time, Albazi. And when you look at someone like Costa, where he has good takedown defense, he has takedowns of his own, he has good jiu-jitsu, he has a ton of power. It's like one of those spots where you're looking at this. If you're looking at someone to play at plus 340, this is like the kind of person that you want, I think, in this kind of situation. Albazi hasn't had time to prepare for him. You mentioned the momentum of Costa coming on in that 12-second knockout. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Terrence McKinney, right? Where he lost in the Contender Series, went back out on the regional scene, got first-round knockout after first-round knockout, got the short notice call against someone in Matt Favola, who, you can make the argument that if they fought again, Favola probably wins that fight, 5 out of the next 6 or 7 times because, we've seen what he's able to do lately. But it's just almost like these fighters catch lightning in a bottle. The door opens for them and they kind of just kick it wide open. So I feel that kind of situation coming here with Costa. If he's able to stuff the takedowns and this fight takes place on the feet for majority of the fight, I think that heavily favors him. And, at minus 430, that's kind of implying that Albazi wins this matchup 82% of the time, right? And I just don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not saying Costa comes in here and wins as a plus 340 dog, but I am saying at these odds, I have to take him because I think that this fight, Kev, you kind of touched on it before, minus 250-ish. I'd line it anywhere from like minus 200 to minus 250, right? And I just, I struggle getting to minus 400 because if your knock on Costa is that he's beating up low-level talent, then you kind of have to use that same lens to look at Albazi here, where, he's beating Malcolm Gordon, he's beating Francis Figueiredo, he's beating Zalga Ismagulov in the UFC. Yeah, under the UFC banner, but when you're weighing them, top to bottom against, their skill level, I don't think it's all that different compared to Costa's opponents. So I think viewing it under that lens and kind of putting them both on an equal playing field, you recognize they're both dominant. They both have paths to victory. So that's where the minus 400 is kind of a head scratcher for me. I don't know if I'll end up betting this fight, but I definitely will not be betting Amir Albazi.
I dig it. And just for a little bit of perspective, Dan mentions this guy Costa, who is a world-renowned regional guy. Based off the Tapology rankings, right? I mean, this man is ranked first in Mexico on the regional scene and first in Latin America. Like, clearly this man is legitimate, right? So it's going to be a really fun fight. Yeah, no, it's really hard for me to get behind a money line in this spot. Sorry about that.
That's a dog barking, baby.
Dog is barking.
Costa.
Yeah, no, man. So, oh man, should be a fun fight, man. If I am taking a spot, it is taking a Albazi by submission, but it's at like plus 110. It's really hard for me to get behind that line. I certainly believe that Costa is ready for this spot. Certainly, he was born for this moment, and should be a great fight between two guys that. Certainly if we look back at this card in 2025, 2026, I mean, we could be talking about two guys fighting for a belt. And I genuinely mean that, and I've said this about this card, man. If you look at the prelims, if you look at this main card, you see a lot of hidden gems on this card that, we look back, in 3-4 years from now, and all these guys are in the top 5, top 10. So firmly believe both these guys are UFC ready and should be an elite matchup.
Yeah, and speaking of guys that are in the top 10, that kind of gives us a nice segue into this co-main event here with Armen Tsarukyan taking on Damir Ismagulov, both guys in the top 10 of the lightweight rankings. Tsarukyan coming off a main event loss to Mateusz Gamrot. Damir Ismagulov coming off a split decision win over Guram Kutateladze. Ismagulov, 19-fight win streak, right? Absolutely dominated M1 global scene over there. Came to the UFC. He's been a force to be reckoned with the entire time. A lot of decision wins, so his name doesn't necessarily carry a lot of weight with some of the casual fans, but anyone that has been watching this guy and has been paying attention to him knows just how lethal of a striker he is. He's so well-rounded everywhere this fight goes, where there's his grappling defense. He's even shown some wrestling and grappling offense of his own. But when this fight is on the feet, he's an absolute tactician. He's a sniper. He has such good angles. He stays out of the way of big shots. He doesn't get hit often. And finding him at plus 155 is a total head scratcher, right? Because Tsarukyan, as it stands now, is minus 190. And just last week, we had Rosenstrike was minus 180. Dracus du Plessis was minus 180, right? And those are two spots there where at that price tag, you're like, okay, I have to bet this guy. This is an absolute steal of a line. And it's hard to look at this line now just a week later at minus 190 and kind of justify playing that same bet, because there's just no way that Tsarukyan holds the advantages over Ismagulov that, say, du Plessis held over Darren Till, or that Rosenstrike held over Chris Daukaus just, 6-7 days ago. And it's just it's a tough matchup to kind of analyze, because Tsarukyan is presumed to have a big grappling advantage here. I know we mentioned Ismagulov has good defensive grappling, but it hasn't been tested at this level, at least in the MMA scene, right, in the UFC with Tsarukyan. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I don't know if Tsarukyan can necessarily hang with Ismagulov on the feet if, say, he stuffs all these takedowns and the fight takes place on the feet for 15 minutes. So it is a pretty difficult fight to break down. I do think that both these guys are very, very high level. It makes sense that they're both top 10 in the division. And as from a betting standpoint, I can't get behind either one. If I think it's a coin flip, obviously I would go dog or pass here with Ismagulov, but it sounds crazy. He's on a 19 fight win streak. He's 24-1, but I feel like there's still more to be seen out of him before I can make this judgment call. Because I do know Tsarukyan is elite level, right? The only guys he's lost to, Mateusz Gamrot, who just fought Beneil Dariush, and Islam Makhachev, who is now the champion of the lightweights. So it is a tough spot from a betting standpoint. As I mentioned earlier, this would just feel like an educated guess more so than, finding empirical evidence that points to why I would make a bet. And for that reason, I have to stay off it.
Yeah, I guess I would say I have a bit of a stronger opinion on this fight, just because, I feel like Damir isn't getting the respect he deserves. He's not a very marketable guy, unfortunately. He certainly doesn't speak English, and, he's done nothing but win. Granted, in his last fight against Guram Kutateladze, who is a super, super tough opponent, a man that beat Mateusz Gamrot, who just beat Armen Tsarukyan, right? So there's your MMA math for you. But super competitive fight. A match where Kutateladze actually managed to take down Damir briefly, and then, kind of hit him illegally, with the knee that actually hit his chest, albeit. But he did get taken down. If the fight continues and the ref doesn't step in, you score a takedown for Guram there. Having said that, it was a super competitive back and forth fight where Damir was able to land his jab at will with pinpoint accuracy, lots of movement, very, very high level MMA fight. I mean, I would recommend anyone to go and rewatch that fight, just because of, again, sort of how good both guys are. And same I can say about Armen Tsarukyan's last fight with Gamrot. I just think, with Armen, he, I think a lot of people they talk him up just because of the fact that he did so well against the now current champ, Islam Makhachev, in I believe it was like his first fight in the UFC. And since then, he's had a nice run. Granted, he dropped his last fight, which some would argue that he won. Very close decision. A fight that I had Gamrot, and I was lucky to be on the right side there. But I just think that, again, here a lot of people are overlooking Damir. I do think this is more of a pick'em fight. And I think, Matt, you're the one that brought up the idea of Kazakhstani's Independence Day coming a day before. So that's very interesting that we have two fighters on this card from Kazakhstan. Similar to the South African presence we had on last week's card. So make of that what you will, but I just think that at plus money we're getting probably a price on a guy like Damir that we'll never get again. He is, as good as his record shows. He's fought tough guys. He's had no easy fights in the UFC. They've all come against quality opponents. And granted, he hasn't been finishing everybody, but he's been, winning in convincing fashion. And for me, I just think you give me a guy at, plus 145, plus 150, whatever he's sitting at right now. Whereas a guy like Tsarukyan that I think, at 26 still has some room to grow. He's got, he'll be, in this division for a long time. And I think definitely has some championship aspirations. I can absolutely see him fighting for a title. But yeah, I think Damir can squeak this out. Again, another fight that I think will be going the distance. It seems like a lot of decisions this card.
Dig it, man. This is such a high quality matchup. It's going to be absolutely bonkers. Guy in Damir, what I truly love about his game is just the way that he feints in and out, and then he just kind of stings with a quick punch, man. Like super, super fast hand speed. Mind you, does have grappling on his side as well. So should be a very high quality match, guys. I mean, Armen, is one of those guys that, obviously has 2 losses in the UFC versus very quality opponents. And, like you said, Dan, I mean, this guy Armen is truly the real deal. But, it tends me to think that, if Armen does take an L here, it doesn't really change anything, right? I mean, this is just one of those spots where both these guys are destined to make a run in the UFC. But man, Matt, you dropped the ball on me this morning and said about this Kazakhstan Independence Day, and it really started to make me second guess this Armen side, because at the end of the day, guys, like the universe never lies. And I mean, we saw the South African Independence Day last week, but nevertheless, man, I mean, these narratives do play a role. It really is. And it does take time to kind of understand and feel for it. I think for those that may not understand the narrative side of handicapping this sport may sound a little foreign. But at the end of the day, it's true. So, this is just so tough, man. This is so tough. I think that you have valid points on the Ismagulov side, right? I mean, clearly the man finds a will, finds a way, finds a win. Now, mind you, he's not no killer in the sense of finishing the fight. But in this sport, you can win it in other ways. So, it's going to be a fun one. I do lean Armen. I think that he is going to find success in the grappling. He stays busy on the ground. He's really not too terrible on the feet either. I think that he can crack, certainly. I think that if there is a finishing upside in this spot, it is on the Armen side. Again, a lot of respect for Ismagulov and what he's done with this 24-1 record. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's not looking to land that power shot. He's not looking to, find that neck. He just does what he has to do to win. And I certainly respect that. So, I do lean Armen side, but wouldn't be surprised if Ismagulov comes through with a greasy split decision.
Yeah, this one has decision written all over it. I think that, you mentioned it. Armen's not terrible on the feet, and Damir is very good on the feet. And I think you could say the same, that Armen is very good on the ground and Damir is not terrible on the ground. I think there's an argument to be made for Damir being slightly better on the ground than Armen is on the feet, right? But it gets back to us playing that kind of prediction-based game. If, we don't have anything else to add on this one, I'd like to move on to our main event here. It is the last fight of 2022 in the UFC, and that is Jared Cannonier taking on Sean Strickland. As I mentioned before, Sean Strickland, if his brain was not scrambled eggs going into that Alex Pereira fight, it most definitely is now, right? He takes on Jared Cannonier, who, just got absolutely outclassed by Israel Adesanya in his last time out. Was kind of surprised. It always surprised me for some reason that how old Jared Cannonier is, right? I'm pretty sure he's 38 years old now, kind of on the tail end of his career. He's bounced around a few weight classes, right? Kind of found his home here at middleweight. After that last title loss, though, you have to kind of question exactly where he is in the division, where his headspace is, especially at that age. Whereas someone like Sean Strickland, he just wants to get locked into a cage with someone and throw hands. It's pretty much all it is. I'm going to let Dan kick this one off because I know he mentioned that he likes Sean Strickland here. So I'd like to hear his take.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a 5-round fight, a guy with Strickland style, high volume, lots of pressure, predominantly boxing. But I think, again, combine that with the height and reach advantage. Well, not the reach advantage, but the height advantage here. And again, combine that with the fact that I just think Cannonier doesn't throw enough, and he tends to get behind on the scorecards early on in fights, and then has to play catch up. And it worked out in the Derek Brunson fight, but Derek Brunson again has shown an ability to fumble the bag, if you will.
Oh yeah, I think Brunson lost that fight more than Cannonier won it.
Yeah, and again, he's kind of done that in the past where he's had some success early, and then he's just not a good nail. And against a guy like Cannonier who does have a lot of power, it's not a recipe for success. Against Izzy, I mean, Cannonier couldn't touch him. Alex Pereira showed us how to beat Israel Adesanya, and that's through pressure, crowding him, and then unloading. And Cannonier just kind of sat back, showed no urgency, was fighting, not to lose, rather to win. And I just feel like, this matchup, obviously not comparing Adesanya to Strickland, two very different fighters in my opinion, but I feel like the pressure and volume of Strickland is going to frustrate Cannonier. And unless Cannonier decides to start throwing his hands and kind of letting it go a little bit, I think he'll just outland him, 3, 4, 5x. I think Strickland came in with with the wrong approach, obviously, to his last fight. But I think he's actually smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. He just has a big mouth and talks a lot of shit. But it makes fights of his worth watching. But I do see him as to be honest, I see him winning here and then rematching Adesanya. I was just kind of going through that scenario in my head, just because I mean, I'm sure they'll be rematching, which I think in a rematch, I'd have to lean Pereira at this point. But I see Strickland as having unsettled business with Izzy, based off previous press conferences and whatnot. So I'm gonna chalk that up for my prediction in 2023. Israel Adesanya to face Sean Strickland. But in terms of this fight here, like I said, I think the volume, the pressure of Strickland is going to frustrate Cannonier. I think he can actually, finish him. To be honest, I mean, Cannonier, he has been finished in the past. Once he starts to open up, I think it's entirely within the realm of possibility. Again, he's getting up there in age, so unless he shows us something, unless he lands that power of his, I just don't see how. I don't see how he wins a 5-round decision against a guy like Strickland in his style.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Sean Strickland is the side here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he opened up around plus 130 and the line got swung open to minus 110. It was that or the other way around where I'm pretty sure Cannonier opened up as the favorite and got steamed down instantly. I think currently where it sits is minus 110 on both sides, maybe Strickland minus 115 on some books. But when you're looking at this matchup, Cannonier really one punch at a time, just trying to get one punch off, not necessarily thrown in combinations, whereas Sean Strickland is the complete other side of the spectrum where he's moving forward. It's not power, but it's in your face, in your face, in your face, in your face. And if there's one thing we've seen from Jared Cannonier is he really struggles against a good jab. And Sean Strickland, you can make the argument, has the best jab and just crisp boxing in that division. You listen to the most knowledgeable people in the MMA space in the UFC, they all count Sean Strickland as one of the better strikers in the division, in the UFC as a whole. And I think a lot of us dismiss that, right? Because he's a goofy personality. He's, trailer trash type, that it's hard for us to kind of perceive him as an elite boxer, which he really is. And I think that he does enough here to frustrate Cannonier, get him off his game, get him off his timing, mostly centered behind that jab. I mean, Strickland doesn't throw kicks. I don't see him mixing in wrestling here. I see a lot of people predicting that that's how he has to win this one. I don't necessarily find that to be true. Dan mentioned the Derek Brunson fight, right? Jared Cannonier, I bet him at minus 150, I want to say, in that fight. It may have been minus 150, minus 160 range. And I remember after that first round, I was like, what the hell was I thinking? He looked so bad, wound up catching the elbows in the clinch to get the finish there. But that was more so a matter of Derek Brunson just absolutely gassing himself out and, for lack of better words, quitting on himself. But we saw it in that first round. Derek Brunson dropped Jared Cannonier on the feet. In the last 10 seconds, he caught him with a right hook and Jared Cannonier went down. So if Derek Brunson can put you down in the stand-up, I have to imagine over an accumulation of 25 minutes, Sean Strickland's going to have his moments too. So I don't think Strickland by knockout's a bad play. I kind of tend to agree with you, Dan. I think he could get Cannonier out of there, and it's just going to be a matter of, one too many jabs down the middle, and it's, either going to open up Cannonier or it's going to be a situation where it's kind of a merciful TKO by the referee. But at plus 350 for Sean Strickland by knockout, I really like the value there. I just don't see where Cannonier can threaten him. Obviously, there could be residual effects from Strickland getting absolutely knocked out by Alex Pereira that maybe, just maybe Cannonier, it's one touch and it's the same shampoo effect where he just goes lights out. But that's a pretty big maybe here for a coin flip of a fight where we know which one's more defensively sound, which one has more output, and, which one's just more more well-rounded and has the better cardio. So for those reasons, Sean Strickland just feels like the A side in this fight all the way.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to add, guys? I mean, you guys broke it down tremendously. It's a classic, point striker with volume that lands pretty significantly versus a guy who's a power puncher. And Dan, I think you make a fantastic point. I think that in a 5-round fight, it tremendously favors Strickland. If it was a 3-round fight, I'd definitely be entertained in taking a money line on the Cannonier side. But man, if there's one thing about Cannonier, you got to give respect where respect is due. This man has a knockout in the UFC in the heavyweight, light heavyweight, and middleweight division, which, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Anthony Rumble Johnson, RIP, did that feat, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if there's anyone else off the top of my mind that I can think of, but it's just one of those things that, you got to give respect, man. I mean, to do that in those different divisions is truly miraculous. I mean, there's a reason that he is the killer gorilla. And a guy in Cannonier, again, you guys make so many great points, just taking the words out of my mouth. A guy in Cannonier coming off of a loss, fighting for the belt. You really wonder where he's at mentally. But to just play a little devil's advocate on a guy in Strickland who just got his wheels blown off 5 months ago, coming off of a very brutal knockout, it may not take I don't want to say much, but it may only take just a few significant shots on the Cannonier side to knock out Strickland. I mean, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility, but for what it's worth, Strickland does work that jab incredibly well. He stays incredibly active, and he puts power behind it. I mean, it's not winding up. He just does what he has to do on the feet. And with that said, I firmly expect this remain on the feet for all 5 rounds if no one goes out cold. I'm curious what the over line is. It just out of curiosity, like an over 2.5.
It was over 4.5 was the line, and I want to say over was -125 and under was +105 for the under.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, you have a guy in Strickland who is clearly going to pour out volume, who is going to land at a clip. I don't look at a guy in Cannonier who necessarily has the best head movement on the feet, and a guy in Strickland, man, like, it truly is special. Just the way he just keeps it pop, 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 pop. And, like you said, Matt, that can get really frustrating in a power puncher in Cannonier who, at the end of the day, is just looking for that big power shot. I mean, sure, he's going to land some nice hooks here and there as well. But at the end of the day, he's looking for the knockout. And, in a 5-round fight, it's really hard for me to get behind a Cannonier side. I do firmly believe that the cardio, massively favors Strickland in this spot. I mean, just look at the muscle mass, and clearly it's going to take more oxygen to keep that train rolling. So, man, it's going to be a fun fight. I'm not on a side yet. I haven't really come to a firm prediction yet. It seems like both you guys on the Strickland side. So certainly if that's a side, it might be worthy of a KP play here, but, yeah, should be a great one, guys. And, a great way to cap off a wonderful 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's much else to add to that or to the main card as a whole. So with that being said, guys, thank you guys for joining in for UFC Vegas 66. Thank you guys for joining in from when we started this thing too. If you've been with us from the beginning, we look forward to pumping out a lot more content in 2023, whether it be fight predictions, fighter interviews, whatever it may be. Who knows what the future holds. But guys, thank you again for joining us. Cash in with us in the Discord channel this weekend. And as always, follow us on Twitter, Fight Night KOD.
Much love.